Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Lots to cover this evening. We're learning more and more about the alleged perpetrators of the bombings in Boston, including the fact that the Tsarnaev family were granted political asylum when they entered the country back in 2002. What is the process of securing asylum in the United States? And will the new immigration reform bill strengthen or weaken the screening process? Advisor to the Anti-Terrorism Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, Dr. WALID PHARES will tell us. And later, the horrific case of abortion Dr. Kermit Gosnell has been making headlines. Susan B. Anthony List President MARJORIE DANNENFELSER will react to the trial and discuss President Obama's decision to appear at a Planned Parenthood event this week. And finally, how does the absence of religious freedom affect violent extremism, both at home and abroad? The director of the Religious Freedom Project, at Georgetown's Berkley Center, Professor Tom FARR, is here to explain. As always, I want you to be part of the program. The number, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally, 205-271-2980, or drop us an email at worldover@ewtn.com. Now, here's the brief. News from the world over this week. The whereabouts of two Orthodox bishops kidnapped at a checkpoint near Aleppo on Monday remain unknown. At gunpoint, unknown assailants pulled Greek Orthodox Patriarch Boulos Yazigi and Assyrian Orthodox Patriarch John Ibrahim from their car. During the abduction, the driver, Deacon Ibrahim Ullah, was executed. The three were on a humanitarian mission. A local opposition group reported the killing, posting a video of the deceased deacon. It is not clear who the murderers' kidnappers are. Unconfirmed reports allege the perpetrators are jihadist Chechen fighters. The country's main opposition group, the Syrian National Coalition, has condemned the kidnapping and blamed President Assad's regime. Meanwhile, Pope Francis on Wednesday repeated his plea for an end to the bloodshed in Syria. He lamented the kidnappings as a further sign of the tragic situation enveloping the dear Syrian nation. And other signs of the tragic situation in Syria emerged on Thursday. U.S., British, and Israeli officials are now claiming evidence that the Assad regime has used chemical weapons on a, quote, small scale. Fighting has escalated across the nation as government warplanes and artillery pounded several cities. The Assad regime is attempting to push back rebel advances. Civilians continue to be killed in the fighting. This video purportedly shows a father pleading for help as his 4 children are buried beneath the rubble. More than 70,000 have been killed since the start of the civil war 2 years ago. Fighting between the soldiers and Islamic extremists in northeast Nigeria killed at least 187 people, the worst single incident of violence in the region since an insurgency began 3 years ago. This past weekend, jihadist fighters from Boko Haram used heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades in their assault. Soldiers had surrounded a mosque they believed was housing Boko Haram members. Officials said the extremists had killed a military officer earlier. We'll talk about all of this and the Boston bombers with WALID PHARES in our next segment. And as the investigation continues into the terror suspect behind last week's Boston Marathon bombing, thousands of Bostonians on Monday commemorated the horrible event. Exactly 1 week after the bombings, Boston marked the attack with a moment of silence. On Sunday, Cardinal Sean Patrick O'Malley spoke about the city's pain and looked ahead to its spiritual recovery.
He referenced in a big
forgiveness does not mean that we do not realize the heinousness of the crime, but in our own hearts, when we are unable to forgive, we make ourselves a victim of our own hatred.
Meanwhile, the surviving suspect, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, has been charged with conspiring to use a weapon of mass destruction and could face a death sentence. Officials say Tsarnaev and his older brother, the suspected co-conspirator, set off the twin explosions. The apparent jihadist-inspired plot killed 3 and injured more than 180 others. Meanwhile, the U.S. bishops are denouncing those using the Boston bombing to argue against immigration reform. During a conference call on Monday supporting Congress's latest immigration reform effort, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York said it was ridiculous, illogical, unfair, and unjust to demean a whole group of people because of the vicious, tragic action of 2 people, end quote. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference went on to suggest that the many opponents of immigration reform will seize on anything, and the recent and vivid tragedy in Boston gives them another opportunity. A Philadelphia jury, is set to hear closing arguments on Monday in the capital murder trial of abortionist Dr. Kermit Gosnell. Defense lawyers announced Wednesday that neither Gosnell nor any other witness would testify on his behalf. Gosnell is charged with killing a woman under his care and 4 babies who purportedly survived abortions. Earlier this week, the judge dismissed murder charges involving 3 other babies, finding the prosecution did not present sufficient evidence that they were viable and born alive. The children had their spines severed at their necks after delivery. 3 clinic workers have pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, either admitting that they helped medicate the woman who overdosed in 2009 or having themselves cut the babies' necks after they were born alive to ensure that the children were dead. More on this case and the implications later in the show. Meanwhile, President Barack Obama has canceled his keynote address at Planned Parenthood's Thursday night fundraising gala. This after the nation's largest abortion provider was criticized for admitting that it had heard complaints from patients who sought abortions from Gosnell's West Philadelphia clinic. Planned Parenthood did not report those complaints. Instead of addressing the gala, President Obama will speak at Planned Parenthood's National Convention on Friday. The White House blamed the schedule change on the president's desire to spend more time with the victims of the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion on Thursday night. The White House has declined comment on the Gosnell trial. Meanwhile, the Archdiocese of New York has dropped its subpoena request seeking White House documents connected to its deliberation of the HHS contraceptive mandate. The Archdiocese is suing the federal government over its requirement that most employers provide contraception, including abortifacient and sterilizations, to their employees under their company health care plans. A spokesman for the Archdiocese declined to comment on why the subpoena request was withdrawn. And a U.S. District Court judge in western Pennsylvania has granted a preliminary injunction barring enforcement of the HHS mandate against a for-profit company owned by a Catholic family. Judge Joy Flowers Conti said that Seneca Hardwood Lumber Company would likely succeed in their litigation efforts, writing, quote, "There is a strong public interest in protecting fundamental First Amendment rights." And conscience protection got a victory in Scotland. An appeals court there ruled that 2 midwives have the right to refuse involvement in abortions. Last year, Glasgow healthcare officials had ruled that the 2 midwives, both Catholics and conscientious objectors, should be required to schedule and coordinate abortions since they would not be directly participating in the procedures. The court, however, said that the conscience clause in the Abortion Act of 1967 protects healthcare professionals against any compulsory involvement in the process. And another country has legalized gay marriage. Earlier this week, France became the 14th and most populous nation to sanction same-sex marriage. The measure passed the socialist-majority National Assembly by a final vote of 331 to 225. Parisian demonstrators on both sides of the issue were out in force before, during, and after the vote. The first same-sex weddings could be held in France as early as June. And back in the United States, the Rhode Island Senate on Wednesday passed a bill legalizing gay marriage. Governor Lincoln Chafee said he will sign it into law. The legislation will take effect on August 1st, making Rhode Island the 10th state to legalize gay marriage. Meanwhile, Delaware could soon follow suit. The Delaware State House approved gay marriage this week. The state Senate will take it up soon. And a panel of doctors has confirmed an inexplicable healing attributed to the intercession of Blessed John Paul II. This according to Vatican journalist Andrea Tornielli of La Stampa. If recognized as a miracle by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, the late pontiff could be canonized before the year is out. Tornielli projects that approval of a miracle is necessary. Quick approval by Pope Francis could make Blessed John Paul the quickest saint canonized under the current process. And finally, the Diocese of Brooklyn is raising eyebrows with its new hipster ad campaign. The ad, appearing on phone booths and bus stops throughout Brooklyn and Queens, depicts Jesus in a robe wearing sneakers. It calls him the original hipster. For those who aren't familiar with the hipster subculture, it's a 20 or 30-something subculture, an urban one, counter-pop culture movement known for eschewing mainstream fashion and politics. Certainly, Jesus was countercultural during his time. Converse All-Star sneakers, as seen in the ad, are virtually standard issue among hipsters. According to the diocese, the hipster ad is part of a marketing campaign designed to appeal to Catholics who yearn for a church they can relate to. Let me know what you think of the campaign on my Facebook page. There's already a lively conversation underway. And in a moment, we've got our own lively conversation. When we return, Dr. WALID PHARES joins us to talk about the aftermath of the Boston terror attacks, how immigration reform may affect the asylum process for refugees, and will it make us safer? The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My first guest is an advisor to the Anti-Terrorism Caucus in the House of Representatives. And for the past 20 years, he served as an expert on country conditions in the Middle East for the U.S. immigration courts. Tonight, he'll talk about global jihad in the wake of the Boston bombings and how the process of seeking political asylum here in the U.S. could change with comprehensive immigration reform. Please welcome back to the program Dr. WALID PHARES.
Thank you.
Great to see you again.
Thank you, Raymond.
Let's start with these brothers, the Tsarnaev brothers. They were radicalized here, WALID, on our shores. They grew up here. These were basically American kids. One got citizenship and one has a temporary visa. What happened here, and what's to stop this from happening again?
Raymond, that's not so different from the previous 48 cases that you and I have discussed many, many times of homegrown jihadi terror. The North Carolina cell, the Fort Dix 6, Major Hassan Hood, and the Arkansas shooter. They all have one thing in common. They are American-born, most of them, and they have been radicalized here. So
how is that happening?
What comes before radicalization? It's indoctrination. Once you have an organization, or online or offline, of individuals who are either radical clerics, like Ayman al-Awlaki of Yemen, Anwar al-Awlaki, and they engage in radicalization, they divide the world in their mind into two. The one world that is the enemy, and America is part of it, and then your world, which is the world of jihad.
Now, al-Awlaki was killed in 2011. Yet he lives online, and apparently these brothers, that's where they saw him, online.
Absolutely. I mean, he lives on. You said it very, very correctly. His writings are here. And that is very important in our strategy in the war on terror. Killing bin Laden physically, killing al-Awlaki physically is not enough. It's the ideology that needs to be dealt with. And unfortunately, the administration does not recognize that there is an ideology to deal with.
Is this classic jihadism, in your estimation, what we saw play out in Boston?
Absolutely. I mean, what has happened in Boston is happening every day in the Middle East. You know, and I discussed what's happening in Baghdad, what's happening in Syria with Jabhat al-Nusra, and of course in Benghazi. This is all related. This is one movement that basically has its imprint everywhere around the world.
In the New York Times today and in other places, they're saying, don't rush ahead here. These people weren't radicalized by forces abroad. It happened here at home, and it is a combination of a subculture that these boys were a part of, these kids were a part of, and isolation. They had nowhere to go. Do you buy that?
No, because jihadism is just the opposite. Jihadism is a sphere, which is a virtual sphere, that brings people together from around the world. They are the least isolated people because they belong to what they believe is an ummah of millions of people. At least that's how they think they are.
Now, I have learned from federal sources that Boston Catholic Charities Refugee and Immigration Services helped facilitate the refugee status for this family, the asylum, the political asylum they were granted in 2002. Now, we should say, and we reached out to Catholic Charities in Boston. They sent us a statement, and they rightly say Catholic Charities of Boston assists more than 200,000 individuals each year with a variety of services. But they're very clear to say the government is the one that confers asylum status or not. They would not confirm that they had been a part of helping this family, but it is not inconceivable, and indeed, I've got it from two sources now who claim that this is, they helped this family along. Let's talk for a moment about political asylum. The Catholic Church, the government, wants to obviously help people who are in dire straits, and most of them are not coming necessarily from places like Russia.
True.
So tell me about this process. What is the screening process? How do we keep people who mean us harm from entering the country?
Well, you have two stages. Stage number one is that the bureaucracy of the government accepts those cases and believe that they are legitimate if they have a legitimate claim. So it doesn't make its path to the court. And then there's the case where the government says, I don't believe you, so it goes to the court, where I served as an expert witness for about 20 years now, and the court will have to determine if this is really a legitimate case. So where's the problem here? Either the government doesn't understand country conditions and doesn't understand the deception of jihadists in this case, or the court doesn't understand. So all goes back to the education of the judge, of the court, of the service, and even of the experts and the defense lawyers. That's what is missing.
Well, as we're going to talk about later in the show, there is this religious ignorance when it comes, and it touches all facets of society, even immigration reform, and it's a part of that. Let's talk for a moment about the screening process. What happens if I'm a person that feels I'm under some political pressure, either my religion is being persecuted, my family, I come to the United States, what happens?
Well, basically, when you come here, you have to prove that your belief or your community are under duress. I have two extreme cases that taught me a lot about how you can deceive the American system. For the last 20 years, I've seen many, many cases. There was one young Coptic Christian woman who was applying for political asylum. And we know how the Copts are under duress. The government was saying, can you go to the church? She said, yes, I can go to the church. So you don't have that case. And they didn't ask her what happened between church and church during the week. Now, on the other hand, the judge told me that he gave political asylum for a guy who was coming from a jihad group that has been persecuted by Mubarak. I said, yes, Your Honor. They are persecuted by the Mubarak regime, but these guys belong to Al-Qaeda. So what you need to have, basically, in the government, in courts, and elsewhere, is a good education about what's happening in those countries.
Now, right now, there are two screens in place. When you first come in and seek and say, I need political asylum, then you have to apply. And then there are a number of screenings. What will this new immigration reform bill do to that process?
It will. One problem that I can see is the huge discretionary power that the executive branch will have, meaning we won't have a system to know, for example, if you're coming from Egypt, if you're coming from Iraq, if you're coming from Pakistan, or other countries under the former Soviet Union, we won't have the parameters clear. So a Secretary of Homeland Security or an Attorney General would determine by discretion based on their advisors, and that would not create a universal system.
There's also this other question. It cuts out there's a year that one has to wait now. You have a year window, rather, to apply for political asylum once you're here in the country. That year will be blown away. You'll have much longer to apply. Also, under certain, again, it's at the discretion of the government, but in the new immigration reform bill, the person, once they apply and make their case, they needn't undergo any further screenings. Is that a concern to you?
It is a great concern. Look what happened with this case, for example. The jihadists, in general terms, that's my expertise, can stay for many, many years undetected. The deception that they can display, meaning they won't have to say anything, write anything, and the government won't have to go online. In this case, had we gone on Facebook, online, in this specific case, we would have detected that these are jihadists.
Well, when they came in 2002, to be fair, when they came, they were boys, and they didn't have any written record. However, the question that arose in my mind, what about the parents? And I'm going to play this clip. This is the mother. This is the Tsarnaev mother speaking out this week. Listen closely to this.
Their protector is God, who is Allah. The only one Allah, okay? If they're going to kill him, they're going to kill him. I don't care. My oldest one is killed, so I don't care. I don't care if my youngest one is going to be killed today. So I want the world to hear this. And I don't care if I am going to get killed too, okay? And I will say Allahu Akbar.
Did the State Department, did Immigration Services somehow miss a strain of jihad in the parents, perhaps?
Well, of course. I mean, this woman, of course, she's a mother. She's emotionally involved here. But what she says is not about a mother. It's about an ideology. And you're absolutely right. The State Department, the bureaucracy in general, for the last 4, maybe 5 or 6 years, have been ignoring one huge elephant in the room, and that's the ideology. So if somebody's talking about jihadism and Salafism, it doesn't register any blip on our radar. But that's all the blip that we need to know as experts, that he's or they are connected to jihadism.
Let's talk for a moment about Syria. I don't want to let you go without talking about this terrible situation. It's been going on for years now. We had 2 archbishops of the Orthodox faith basically kidnapped. Their driver was shot, a deacon in the church. Your thoughts on why are they attacking peaceful religious who, if anything, have been trying to bridge the gap between the rebels and the Assad regime?
Raymond, the unfortunate situation is that because we are late, the United States and our allies, in 2011, we did not intervene. In 2012, we have our elections. And now in 2013, Assad by now has been able to crush the revolt. And because of that, the opposition has been penetrated by whom? By the jihadists, by the Salafists. Now, one component of their ideology is to get rid of the Christians and the Druze and the other minorities. And they are paying the price. Christians in Syria, who are 2.5 million people, are now less than 1.5 million or 1.8 million still in the country. The others have been fleeing.
Let's talk about the use of sarin gas that the State Department, UK intelligence, as well as Israeli intelligence, is reporting that Assad used chemical weapons on his people. How serious is this? I mean, I assumed he had used those weapons all along, right? We'd seen reports of that earlier.
Yes, actually, we assumed that he would use them when he's in trouble. We assumed that he will use them if he will have to leave Damascus. Now that the government, the US government, UK and Israel, and maybe others, have basically discovered the evidence about it. It's not a mass use, but once you begin the use of it, it's very serious. And there is also the risk that the opposition will get hold of the same poison, and then they will be both using it. That would be very dangerous.
Have they crossed the red line established by this administration?
Look, this administration has established many red lines. all of these red lines have been thrusted. But of course, I understand that the administration is in trouble because Syria is not Libya. If you intervene in Syria, you're facing off with Iran, with Hezbollah, with many in Iraq. And is the administration ready to face off with Iran? There are no plans for that.
Is this the time, given, and we saw the George Bush Library open up today, the dedicated, is this the moment to intervene again in the Middle East? Is that the appropriate way to go about bringing to bay this jihadi tendency and the terrorism that we've seen unleashed all over the world?
Raymond, historically, this is the moment to defend ourselves first. And what's brewing in the Middle East, in Syria, in Egypt, with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists, in Libya, we have been attacked in Benghazi. There is no more parts of the planet that are safe and the other parts that are not safe. What we need to do is not just intervene physically. We need to identify allies in Syria. We have not done so because the opposition as a whole has jihadists and has seculars. The army of Mr. Assad can be split. So we need to have a smarter, more intelligent, strategic approach to Syria, bring in the good people together, and then get rid of Assad and get rid of Al-Qaeda at the same time.
Returning to the situation here, the Boston bombing, it seems this new breed of terrorists, they're young, They're well educated, affluent in some cases. How is that different from the stereotypes, what we've been led to believe are the folks we're facing here?
The stereotype is gone. The stereotype is dead. What we have right now is an American type of jihadist. People who are born here, speak our language, better accent than I do. And more important than that, they are very well connected among each other. What the outside jihadist world is saying about them, look, 2 guys have been able to shut down Boston. The airspace, no more trains. They had a whole army behind them. I mean, it's a victory for our law enforcement. It will be explained in a video one day as a victory for them. As an example for others.
I will leave it there. Dr. WALID PHARES, thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon. The Coming Revolution, Struggle for Freedom in the Middle East by Dr. WALID PHARES is still available at bookstores everywhere. When we return, President of the Susan B. Anthony List, Marjorie Dannenfelser, will react to the revelations of the Kermit Gosnell trial and more. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is the chief spokesman and strategist for the Susan B. Anthony List, an organization that works to elect pro-life candidates to public office. She, like so many, have been intensely following the trial of Philadelphia abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell. Here to comment is the president of the Susan B. Anthony List, Marjorie Dannenfelser.
Hi, great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You here. Let's talk for a moment about what happened this week in Philadelphia. The defense rested. Gosnell nor any of his associates were willing to defend him from the stand. But the curious thing, the judge dropped 3 of the 7 murder charges. Why? These were against these babies that were allegedly born and then killed.
Yeah.
Why were those 3 charges dropped?
Well, the easy answer out at the outset is that there was no. How do you tell if a person's alive or not at that stage? I mean, and the easy answer is that there's no real tests right now because we're at a place in abortion law where there is no test. So if there's a twitch or a move or a recoil or a sound that a child makes, does that mean they're alive? I mean, when are they alive?
That's what the prosecutors were saying. These children,
That's
when they went to pull them, they recoiled, they moved, they grabbed.
Yeah, that's what the prosecutors say. Is that a neurological response? Is that it gets into the ghastly area of when do we think that a person is alive and when do we protect them? It really is actually in the real meat and bones of the abortion argument itself. When is that person living? And the judge decided, gee, looks to me like maybe they're not living. And so that's why he did that.
But what it really exposes, if anything, is that in the incongruity in the law that one can be it's perfectly acceptable to snuff a life out inside the womb.
That's true.
But the moment that the entire body is outside the womb, then it becomes a criminal matter.
That's right. There was much discussion about, and this is a horrible thing for us to have to talk about and think about.
It's
and
grisly
we must.
stuff. And it's why the media, I think, is shying away from
It's
this.
a recoil that we all have, but we have to look, and journalists have to ask questions. If the hand is inside and you smother the child before you pull it out, that's an abortion. If the child is born and you smother it, that is infanticide. I mean, there's about a minute between those 2 situations, and clearly we have a humanity question on our table in this country. And the only difference is that this actual horror has come to light, that we're actually all looking at it and talking about it. It's been happening.
The press in Philadelphia has dubbed this the House of Horrors, Gosnell's clinic. And I mean, we've got jars of children's feet along the walls, kept almost as trophies. I mean, Hannibal Lecter would blush going into this place. It's grisly, just the pictures I've seen. The question is, why wasn't this regulated? Wasn't this a state-approved abortory?
Well, I mean,
Are the others regulated?
Well, this was regulated. We are living in the back alley now because, you know, what they promise, what the other side promises is that if you outlaw abortion, you're going to be living in the back alley. Well, this is the back alley because purportedly it was regulated. There were regulations in this clinic passed by a pro-life Democratic governor, Bob Casey. When Governor Tom Ridge, pro-choice governor, came in, he decided, because he didn't want to prompt a fight with the pro-choice crowd, that he would not enforce those regulations. For 17 years, no one went into that clinic until police went in on a drug charge to investigate a drug charge. And when they went in, they saw what they had no idea. They saw the blood-spattered walls. They saw the feet severed in jars. But it would be a mistake to think that the horror here ends in Philadelphia. And I don't know, none of us know, if the horror equals that place. But the tentacles of Gosnell, even his own clinics, he did abortions in other clinics in other places. Planned Parenthood knew about it, didn't report it. Planned Parenthood's own employees in other places have quit because they report such things. In Virginia, where we're right across the border here, there have been horrible reports of clinic filth in those clinics as well, and it's because of fear. In the end, it's because the fear that public people charged with protecting women and actually just at least providing a sanitary environment have been afraid to confront the pro-choice crowd.
But if you're concerned about women's health and children's health and women's rights and well-being, can we at least have a clean office? I mean, is that too much to ask?
Yeah, I mean, everything's turned on its head. The war on women, everything's turned on its head. It is one of those moments when you see everything that has been espoused from the Oval Office about the war on women, making sure it's safe, legal, and rare, making sure that we take care of women and children. All of that has been turned on its head. Because what has actually been come out of all of this is really just an adherence to the ideology of abortion, really not caring for women or of course, thinking about unborn children. But it's an adherence to this as a right and a equality.
Given the explosive revelations in this Gosnell trial, given all we've seen over the last few weeks in that courthouse, there was some pressure on the president to not speak at Planned Parenthood's gala, which was to take place tonight. As it turns out, the White House decided not to speak at that gala. Do you see this as a result of not wanting to too closely align himself at this particular moment with the abortion industry? He is speaking tomorrow at their national gathering here.
He is in a small group. And I'm very careful, as I know you are, about talking about people's motives. However, whatever his motives are, it was a very good time to not be the public spokesperson for Planned Parenthood and draw more attention to an organization that has turned a blind eye to the horror that's going on there. I think in the end, they do not want this conversation to be a national level, high level conversation because, of course, now we're talking about another person. They don't want to go there. The more we go there, the more we get to a place where we have common ground.
Well, as we saw earlier in the show and we reported earlier in the show, the president and the White House is saying the reason that he changed his schedule is because he wanted to spend a little more time in Waco.
That's true. That's what he
with
said.
the victims of that fertilizer bombing there. So
that he said that, and you can't argue against spending time with mourning families. However, he knew this for a while. He said that was his change. I would just say plenty of politicians make reasons for, moving out of an obligation they'd rather not face, and I think it's possible, but who knows? I would just say this is not a good time for the president. This is not a good time for Planned Parenthood. It is not a good time for the abortion industry, and it's a good time for them to duck. And there are a lot of good opportunities now for pro-life activists, pro-life people running for office, like in Virginia, to say it's time to really take a look at what you guys are really talking about, and you're not really looking out for the welfare of women.
So what will be, do you think, the long-term implications of this Gosnell trial? Just a few months ago, coming out of the elections, people were saying, this issue is dead, this pro-life thing you shouldn't talk about anymore, and you social conservatives should go away. This is a loser on a national ticket. You would say what?
Well, I'm old enough to say that after every single election, the reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated. After every single election, we are declared dead, and then moments later, we rise up again and show our power and our. I mean, really, 59% of the public, according to NBC Wall Street Journal poll recently, said that not only does the American public want abortion to be do they disagree with it, but they want it to be outlawed. I mean, this is a big difference from the context of the election. So the outgrowth of this conversation is that we're not only very clear as a nation what we think about certain stages along the way. Late-term abortions, 60, 70, 80% oppose. Parental notification, 60, 70, 80% think that parental notification should be involved. We have a consensus on these issues. Situations like this help bring us to consensus. More importantly, they help us understand that there are two people involved in every decision, and both deserve our love and compassion.
Before I let you go, in Virginia, they just passed new regulations on the 20 abortion clinics in that state. What are those regulations, and what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, the context of this could not be better. And actually, in answer to your question about the consequence and the outgrowth, this is vitally important. It's a governor's race that has a national intention. It is a national level race. Terry McAuliffe, who opposes clinic regulations, he's been fighting them. Ken Cuccinelli, Attorney General, has been defending them. They are just the types of situations in the Philadelphia clinic that he's been fighting to protect against. Now Terry McAuliffe is in a very tough place to say we should not be going in there to make sure that doctors should wash their hands between procedures, that there should be hallways that are wide enough that a gurney can get through in case there is an emergency. So that has become what McAuliffe calculated was a tough thing for Cuccinelli and a good thing for him. It's turned out to be a very strong advantage for Cuccinelli, because clearly we've seen in the Gosnell situation what happens when you don't regulate. You don't watch over real women and look out for their health.
Marjorie Dannenfelser, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having
me.
me.
See you next time. If you're interested in the work of the Susan B. Anthony List, you can visit them at sba-list.org. When we return, how does international religious freedom abroad affect violent extremism on the home front? And how should U.S. foreign policy view this complex relationship? Tom Farr of the Berkley Center at Georgetown University will tell us when The World Over Live returns. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. With violence breaking out in the name of religion all over the world, can religion have a mediating effect, even a peaceful one, in the policy arena? My next guest is director of the Religious Freedom Project at the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University. He's a former American diplomat and a leading authority on international religious freedom. Please welcome Professor Tom Farr to the program. Tom, great to have you here.
Raymond, thanks for having me.
Let's start with what is the weak link, if you will, in American foreign policy, and how is it related to religion?
The weak link on this issue is really, I'd say three things. One is just garden variety secularism, which is typical among our political elites, and certainly is not only our foreign policy elites. But there's also a confusion about the Constitution. There was a study done a couple of years ago that showed a lot of American diplomats think it's unconstitutional to get involved in religion, that somehow the Establishment Clause prevents it. Then finally, I would just point out that there's an aversion in our training and our thinking about the world. Henry Kissinger wrote a book called Diplomacy in 1994. 1,000 pages, 135-page index, the word religion does not appear in it. It's as if it has nothing to do with the world out there. We haven't quite overcome this problem yet.
No, and it's become a major focus, I think. Certainly when we're talking about the religious extremism, the violent terrorism we've seen all over the world, and even on our own shores, it is at the center of all of these issues. How do we deal with that? What is the link between religious freedom abroad and violent religious extremism at home?
Well, it's a great question. It's an important question as far as I'm concerned. In my view, religious freedom is linked to a lot of good things: economic growth, political stability, social harmony. But it's also a way to fight terrorism, particularly religion-based terrorism. Imagine, if you will, a Saudi Arabia, for example, that for the past 50 years has had religious freedom. And Osama bin Laden and the 15 Saudi hijackers were raised in a kingdom in which They imbibed a lot of the same toxic Wahhabist stuff that they were raised on, but they also heard other voices. They heard other Muslim voices saying, this is nonsense. You don't have to kill people who offend Islam. There are other ways to deal with this. They hear the voices of the 1.5 million Catholics that live in Saudi Arabia because they're free to speak out, or atheists or secularists for that matter. Would 9/11 have happened? Of course, we can't know the answer to that question, but I think it's a good question. I put it to my students this way. If religious freedom had existed, perhaps this anger, this toxic belief that if you offend Islam, you must be punished, probably would not exist to the extent that it does now.
So what you're suggesting is the religious suppression and the one-size-fits-all religious box that some of these regimes have imposed on their people actually increases this hateful sentiment that finds its way into religion, whether that be Islam or otherwise.
Sure. You know, we just saw on the news President Bush being, some say rehabilitated, but certainly celebrated in Texas today. He probably got some things wrong, but one of the things that I think he had right in his presidency was the understanding, he said this at a great speech at West Point. The United States has historically stood with tyrants in the Middle East because we believed that it would keep, among other things, keep the lid on radical Islam. And what that policy gave us was 9/11. It did not give us stability. Now, we are not puppet masters. We can't tell these people what to do, but when they opt, as the Egyptians have, for example, for democracy, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to make it stable. It's very much in our interest to help them do that. We need to tell them in a variety of ways, it won't work. You won't get what you want without religious freedom.
But Tom, let's look at Egypt. Yes, they've embraced democracy, but the Coptic Christians are all but snuffed out at this time.
Indeed,
they have become a targeted class. We've seen the same thing happen in Iraq. The cradle of Christianity, the Chaldeans are all over the place. They've been scattered. Syria, ditto. Isn't there an argument to be made there that sometimes, in the case of Iraq, in the case of Egypt, though they're tyrants, though they're imperfect, it was in their interest to keep those communities, peaceful Christian and Catholic communities in most cases, alive and in their midst and thriving?
Sure. If we could turn the clock back to Saddam Hussein, would we do so? If we could turn the clock back to Hosni Mubarak, would we do so? I think those are irrelevant questions. We have what we have. We have the Muslim Brotherhood in power. I wish that we had been trying to influence the Muslim Brotherhood all along, but we are where we are. Egypt is trying to develop a stable democracy. We need to convince the people who are in charge there that they're not going to get what they want if they can't struggle more successfully with this issue of religious freedom. And it is the Copts. It's the Coptic minority, it's the other religious minorities, but it's also the Sunni reformers in Egypt who have to keep their heads down because the Muslim Brotherhood is in power. Throughout the Middle East, there are either laws or practices against what they call blasphemy. I like to tell my students the story of the graduate student in Afghanistan who wrote a paper arguing from the Quran that men and women are equal. He argued that the Quran says men and women are equal. He was turned in by his professors, that's what I like to tell my students about. Then he was charged with blasphemy, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Now, you can't have a democracy where this kind of thing happens, but the point is, this prevents reformers from within the majority religion from having any influence on the way that the religion develops. So we have been terribly inept in pursuing American interests in promoting religious freedom in these countries. We are reactive, we put out reports, presidents sometimes make good speeches, as do secretaries of state, but if there's no policy behind those speeches, they're just words floating above the Red Sea or wherever they're given.
Do you subscribe to the idea, and some have floated it, that in the case of the Boston bombers, this can be traced back to the Russian hardline approach to the Chechen Muslims, and that by depriving them of property, exiling them, in some cases killing them in large swaths of the community, that it sowed this rebellion? my counter to it, before you answer, would be Catholics were treated the same way in the 40s in Russia. They were deprived of property. They were exiled. They aren't blowing people up today.
Sure. And I would argue that one of the reasons for that is Catholicism has the theological premises that would allow people to deal with this kind of thing in different ways if they're going to turn to religion at all. But I do think there's plenty of evidence in the lands of Islam that when these people have been brutally treated, radicalization results. Osama bin Laden himself learned at the feet of at least the writings of a guy who had been radicalized in Egypt by Gamal Nasser in the 1950s, a fellow named Syed Qutb. And when Osama bin Laden was in school, he read the writings of this guy. You know, there's a long chain that suggests that repression does not lead to stability. So this doesn't mean that anything goes. Religious freedom doesn't mean you get to do what your religion says merely because it says it. It doesn't mean widow burning or suicide bombings, because there's Richard John Newhouse had a phrase, it has a self-denying ordinance to it. It doesn't mean anything goes, but it means you have the right to enter into the democratic public square, to make arguments, to be engaged in civil society. This is what we should be convincing these countries that they need, and it would help us. So to answer your question, Raymond, I don't know whether these creeps that perpetrated this Boston tragedy were you can have a line. This may be a little too neat to say there's a line between Russian repression. But clearly, the science so far suggests there is an idea here that has to do with Islam, that has to do with the notion that these Americans have offended Islam. The piece that you played earlier from the mother, you know, we can't be sure here, but there does seem to be an idea behind what they were doing. It isn't their isolation. It isn't that they were angry at this or that. They had an idea that they were trying to carry out. And you can't defeat an idea.
But doesn't that fly in the face of so many who would suggest if you open the doors of democracy, if you expose these people to the beauties of freedom and free expression and religious freedom, they will embrace it? Here are two kids that clearly denied it. In fact, they had nothing good to say about America. They despised the country in which they were raised, essentially.
Right.
How does religion, and I think it must be a religious response, what is the religious response to that?
Well, we have to have Muslims respond to other Muslims. And that's why we need religious freedom in the Middle East. So I'm convinced, I'm not an expert on this, but I've been watching it for well over a decade, that there are in every one of these countries Muslims who have to keep their heads down because they'll be charged with blasphemy if they speak out against it.
Before we go, we're almost out of time. I want to try to end on a positive note. There was the story out of Canada where the Muslim leaders actually exposed and foiled this train plot. Is that an example of what you're talking about? It
is an example because I think this happens in the United States too. Muslims in the United States, some of them complain a lot, but most of them, virtually all of them, I think, love this country. They don't want people to blow it up. So we've had lots of Muslim Americans, like these Canadian Muslims, turn in, when they find out about some of these plots, they turn them in. Yeah, that's religious freedom in action. Religious freedom makes people love their countries rather than hate them. Of course, nothing is quite that simple. There are many causes here, but this one is missing from American foreign policy. We've had a law for 15 years. We're not doing it very well, and we should be.
Tom Farr, I hope you'll come back.
Thanks, Raymond.
Great to see you. Thank you for being here. You can find out more about the work of Tom Farr and the Berkley Center for Religion by visiting berkleycenter.georgetown.edu. And his book, World of Faith and Freedom, Why International Religious Liberty is Vital to American National Security, is worthy reading and available at bookstores and online. Well, that's all the time we have. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. And be sure to sign up for my weekly e-blasts on the website as well. I'll keep you updated on the latest news as it breaks. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.